Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to get into something that feels so fundamental, so natural, it's almost like breathing, your national identity. But what if I told you that powerful feeling is actually a pretty new invention, something born from a wild collision of technology, capitalism, and philosophy?
It sounds like a riddle, right? A book from the 1500s and your modern passport. What's the link? Well, the answer changes literally everything about how we see the world. That sense of national identity, the one that feels so ancient, so timeless, it was actually kickstarted by the printing press and the simple, relentless search for profit. It's a crazy story. Let's get into it. Okay, so our first guide on this journey is a political scientist named Benedict Anderson. And he came along with this really radical idea that nations aren't these ancient, eternal things that have always been here. Nope. He argued they're actually modern inventions created by some very specific forces in history. So here's Anderson's core idea, his mic drop moment, the imagined community. Think about it. You feel this deep connection, this sense of belonging with millions of people in your country, but you'll never, ever meet most of them. It's not a community based on seeing each other every day. It's a community that exists in your mind based on a powerful shared idea. So the big question is, how on earth did millions of people, strangers to one another, all of a sudden start thinking of themselves as being on the same team? Well, Anderson says it wasn't some grand conspiracy or master plan. It was basically a historical accident, an explosive one. It happened when three things collided: the drive to make money, the new tech of the printing press, and the simple fact that people all over the place spoke different languages. Right, so if it was an accident, how did it actually work? Let's pop the hood and look at the engine here. How does a piece of technology, a printing press, actually build a whole new way of thinking, a new blueprint for what a nation even is? First, you have to appreciate the sheer scale of this thing. 200 million. That's roughly how many books were printed in Europe by 1600. I mean, just try to wrap your head around that. We went from a world where knowledge was rare, handwritten, and locked away by a tiny elite, to a world where it was mass-produced and spreading like wildfire. This wasn't just a small change. It was a complete rewiring of human communication. You see, before the printing press, the educated world of Europe had a single sacred language, Latin, but only a tiny fraction of people could actually read it. Now, if you're a book publisher who wants to make a profit, who are you going to sell to? The small elite who read Latin, or the millions and millions of people who only speak their local everyday languages? It's a no-brainer, all right? Add in the Protestant Reformation, which desperately wanted Bibles people could actually read for themselves, and boom, the old unified world of Latin just fell apart. And this is the magic trick, right here. This is Anderson's core mechanism. First, print creates these huge new communication zones. Suddenly, a guy in one city who speaks a thick dialect can read the exact same book as a woman hundreds of miles away. Second, it basically freezes language in time. By standardizing spelling and grammar, it makes a language feel solid, ancient, and eternal. And finally, it creates new centers of power. The dialects that got chosen for print became the official languages, and everyone else's way of speaking became secondary. So, Anderson gives us this incredible machine for building community, for creating these powerful, unifying stories. It's fascinating. But, and this is a huge but, just as we start to get comfortable with how these stories are made, we have to ask a really uncomfortable question. What if these big, unifying tales, what if they're actually a trap? And that question brings us to our second thinker, a philosopher named François Lyotard. He looked out at the world in the late 20th century and saw something huge happening. He realized that we, as a culture, were losing our faith in the big, sweeping stories that used to explain everything. Lyotard gave these big stories a name, meta-narratives. Think of them as the ultimate stories a society tells itself to make sense of the world. You know, the ones. Stories about how science and progress will solve all our problems, or how history is leading to some grand finale, or the sacred destiny of a nation. Lyotard's whole point was that the postmodern condition is basically just incredulity toward meta-narratives. We've heard all the big stories, and we just don't really buy them anymore. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Lyotard noticed that as our belief in these big stories starts to crumble, a kind of panic sets in. You hear it everywhere, a call for order, a craving for unity, for a solid identity, for security. When the big story is gone, people get scared, and they desperately want a simple, comforting one to come back. They start to get really suspicious of anything that's new, different, or experimental. For Lyotard, the place where you could see this battle playing out most clearly was in the world of art. He said that in a world that no longer believes the old fairy tales, art has a new and much, much harder job to do.
So he drew this really sharp line in the sand. On one side, you have modern art. He says it's basically nostalgic. It misses that feeling of a lost unity, and it tries to give you some of that comfort back through beautiful, familiar forms. But postmodern art, it does the exact opposite. It doesn't want to comfort you. It wants to show you all the things that the big, neat stories leave out. It denies you that easy pleasure to point towards what he called the unpresentable. All the complex, messy stuff that our language and our neat little categories just can't contain.
And this is really the heart of the matter. For Lyotard, being skeptical of these big, unifying stories isn't just a clever intellectual exercise. It's not just a game. It's an ethical duty, a moral responsibility. This is his warning, and he doesn't pull any punches. He says that the price we pay for wanting that simple story, for that nostalgia for a world where everything fits together perfectly, is terror. Because when you decide there is only one story, one truth, one whole, then anyone or anything that doesn't fit into that story has to be forced into it, silenced, or destroyed. And he argued the 20th century gave us terrifying proof of that.
So this is his call to arms. Let us wage a war on totality. That means actively resisting those easy, all-encompassing explanations. Let us be witnesses to the unpresentable. That means paying attention to the things that don't fit, the experiences that get ignored. Let us activate the differences and save the honor of the name. And that means celebrating what makes each thing and each person unique, instead of trying to erase it all under one giant banner.
So, we're left with this. Benedict Anderson shows us how our communities are built on powerful, imagined stories. And then Jean-François Lyotard comes along and warns us to be incredibly careful with those stories. So in this world of imagined communities that we all live in, how do we follow his advice? How do we save what's unique and individual? What stories do we choose to believe in? And what's the real cost of believing them?